The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. 221B, Baker Street, London. Sherlock Holmes sat, as he often did, in deep thought. I, on the other hand, was occupied examining a walking cane that had been inadvertently left at our lodgings.
Well, Watson, what do you make of it?
Holmes?
Since we have been so unfortunate as to miss him and have no notion of his errand, this accidental souvenir becomes of importance. Let me hear you reconstruct the man by an examination of it.
Well, it has a silver band on it. To James Mortimer, MRCS, from his friends of the CCH 1884.
Go on.
I think that Dr. Mortimer is a successful elderly medical man, well esteemed since those who know him give him this mark of their appreciation.
Good.
I think also that the probability is in favour of his being a country practitioner who does a great deal of his visiting on foot.
Why so?
Because the stick has been so knocked about that I can hardly imagine a town practitioner carrying it. The thick iron ferrule is worn down. So it is evident he's done a great amount of walking with it.
Perfectly sound.
I should guess friends of the CCH is something Hunt. The local hunt to whose members he's possibly given some surgical assistance.
Oh, really, Watson? You excel yourself.
Why, thank you, Holmes.
Though I'm afraid, my dear Watson, that most of your conclusions were erroneous. The man is certainly a country practitioner, and he walks a good deal.
Then I was right.
To that extent, I would suggest that a presentation to a doctor is more likely to come from a hospital than a hunt. Therefore, Charing Cross Hospital naturally suggests itself.
You may be right.
We believe there has been a change from a town hospital to a country practice. Is it then stretching our inference too far to say that the presentation was on occasion of the change?
It is certainly possible.
He was most likely a house surgeon or house physician, as a man well established in a London practice would not drift into the country. The date on the stick tells us that he left 5 years ago. So your grave, middle-aged family practitioner becomes a fellow around 30, amiable, unambitious, absent-minded, and the possessor of a favourite dog, which I should describe as being larger than a terrier and smaller than a mastiff.
How can you be certain of that?
He has been in the habit of carrying this stick behind his master. The spacing between the marks of his teeth are too broad for a terrier and not broad enough for a mastiff. It may have been... Yes, by Jove, it is a curly-haired spaniel.
My dear fellow, how can you possibly be so sure of that?
For the very simple reason that I see the dog himself at our very doorstep. Come in, Dr. Mortimer.
Ah, you have it. I am so very glad.
A presentation from Charing Cross Hospital?
Yes, from one or two friends on the occasion of my marriage.
You're married, you say?
Yes, sir. I married, and so left the hospital. It was necessary to make a home of my own.
Come. We are not so far wrong after all.
Mr. Holmes, I presume that is Mr. Sherlock Holmes whom I'm addressing?
Indeed. And this is my friend, Dr. John Watson.
Glad to meet you, sir.
And now, Dr. James Mortimer, you have come to see me in connection with that manuscript from around 1730 that is in your pocket?
1742 to be exact, but
You have presented an inch or two of it to my examination all the time that you have been talking. It would be a poor expert who could not date a document to within a decade or so. It is in regard to this that you wish to consult with me.
Chapter 2. The Curse of the Baskervilles.
Mr. Holmes, this family paper was committed to my care by Sir Charles Baskerville, who tragically died some 3 months ago in Devonshire. He was a strong-minded man, sir, yet he took this document very seriously.
May I examine it?
Of course.
It appears to be a statement of some sort.
Yes, of a certain legend which runs in the Baskerville family. The document is long, if I may summarize it.
Please.
Holmes leant back in his chair, placed his fingertips together, and closed his eyes.
The manor of the Baskervilles has been held in the family since the time of the Great Rebellion. The document concerns one Hugo Baskerville who is said to have been a wild, profane, and godless man. Hugo came to love the daughter of a yeoman who held lands near the Baskerville estate. The love was, however, not reciprocated. It is said that one summer day, when her father and brothers were away, Hugo, with several companions, came upon the farm and carried her away. He placed her in the upper chamber, whilst he and his companions drank wine downstairs. The maiden was braver than he had given credit for, and with the aid of the ivy, which still covers the south wall, climbed down and headed homewards across the moor. Upon finding her gone, he cried aloud that he would that very night render his body and soul to the powers of evil if he could overtake the wench. One of the companions cried out that they should put the hounds upon her. Hugo ran from the house, crying to his grooms to saddle his mare and unkennel the pack, giving them a kerchief of the maid for the scent, and set her off over the moor. The companions came to their senses and pursued him. They caught him up in the centre of a clearing where lay the unhappy maid, fallen dead of fear and of fatigue. Not far from her lay the body of Hugo Baskerville. Standing over him and plucking at his throat stood a foul, great, black beast, shaped like a hound, its eyes blazing and jaws dripping with his blood. The hound is said to have plagued his family ever since.
Well?
Do you not find it interesting?
To a collector of fairy tales?
Dr. Mortimer drew a folded newspaper from his pocket and handed it to Holmes.
This is the Devon County Chronicle from the 14th of May. The article reports the circumstances connected with the death of Sir Charles. On the 4th of May, Sir Charles had declared his intention of starting next day for London and had ordered Barrymore, the butler, to prepare his luggage. He was in the habit every night before going to bed of walking down the yew alley of Baskerville Hall and smoking a cigar. That night, he went out as usual, but never returned. At 12 o'clock, Barrymore went in search of his master. He proceeded down the alley, and it was at the far end of it that his body was discovered. One fact which has not been explained is that his footprints altered their character and that he appeared from thence onward to have been walking upon his toes. No signs of violence were to be discovered upon Sir Charles's person, although there was an incredible facial distortion.
This article, you say, contains the public facts?
It does.
Then let me have the private ones.
The Baskerville family had been on the verge of virtual ruin, but Sir Charles made large sums of money in South African speculation. Sir Charles was an amiable and generous character and had the respect of everybody who knew him. He had commenced large-scale reconstruction and improvement at the hall and various projects in the community. Despite his wealth, Sir Charles had simple tastes, and the only servants at the hall were a married couple named Barrymore. The moor is very sparsely inhabited, and those who live near each other are thrown very much together, with the exception of Mr. Frankland of Laughter Hall and Mr. Stapleton, the naturalist of Merripit House. There are no other men of education within many miles. Sir Charles's health had been impaired for some time, especially to some affection of his heart. Lately, his nervous system had become increasingly strained. He had taken this legend to heart, so much so that although he would walk in his own grounds, nothing would induce him to go upon the moor at night. It was at my advice that Sir Charles was about to go to London. I thought that a few months among the distractions of town would send him back a new man. On the night of Sir Charles's death, Barrymore sent a groom to me. I carefully examined the body, which had not been touched until my arrival. There was certainly no physical injury of any kind, but contrary to the inquest, which said there were no other footprints, some little distance off I observed some fresh and clear.
A man's or a woman's?
Mr. Holmes, they were the footprints of a gigantic hound.
Chapter 3. The Problem.
And you said nothing?
To what end? The marks were some 20 yards from the body, and no one gave them a thought. I don't suppose I should have done so had I known the legend.
There are many sheepdogs on the moor?
This was no sheepdog.
You say it was large.
Enormous.
But it had not approached the body?
No.
What is the alley like?
There are 2 lines of old yew hedge, 12 feet high and impenetrable, except for the wicket gate which leads onto the moor. At one end, the hall. At the other is a summer house. Sir Charles had evidently stood at the gate for 5 to 10 minutes.
How do you know that?
Because the ash had twice dropped from his cigar.
Excellent. And this is a colleague Watson after her own heart. And there were no other marks other than his own?
None.
What are you fearful to say, Dr. Mortimer?
Before the terrible event occurred, Several people reported to having seen upon the moor a huge creature, luminous, ghastly, and spectral.
You, a trained man of science, you do not believe there to be a supernatural demon?
I do not know what to believe.
Yet you must admit that the footmarks are material.
Well, the original hound was material enough to tug a man's throat out, and yet was diabolical as well.
Dr. Mortimer, I have hitherto confined my investigations to this world. If you believe this to be supernatural, why do you desire me to investigate it?
I did not say that I desired you to investigate it.
And then how can I assist you?
I am here as an executor of Sir Charles's will. The next of kin is one Henry Baskerville. After Sir Charles's death, we inquired for the young gentleman and found that he'd been farming in Canada. He is due to arrive at Waterloo Station in 1 hour and a quarter. I have come to ask your advice as to what I should do with him.
There is no other claimant, I presume?
None. Sir Charles had 2 brothers, Sir Henry's father and Roger Baskerville. Roger was the black sheep of the family, and it is said that the very image of Hugo, the cause of the curse. He fled to Central America and died there in 1876 of yellow fever.
And why should he not go to the home of his fathers?
I feel sure that if Sir Charles could have spoken to me before his death, he would have warned me against bringing them to that deadly place, and yet it is no understatement to say that the prosperity of the whole countryside depends upon his presence.
But surely, if your supernatural theory be correct, it would work in London as easily as in Devonshire.
Please, Mr. Holmes, what would you recommend?
I need to think upon the matter. I recommend that you meet Sir Henry Baskerville as planned, and then return here at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Say nothing to him about the matter.
I will do so. Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
Only one more question, Dr. Mortimer. You say that before Sir Charles Baskerville's death, several people saw this apparition upon the moor.
3 people did.
Did any see it after?
I have not heard of any.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson.
Dr. Mortimer, can I be of any assistance to you?
Not at this instant. But if we could reconvene before 9 a.m. tomorrow, then I should be very glad to compare impressions as to this most interesting problem which has been submitted to us.
I knew that seclusion and solitude were necessary for my friend in these hours of intense mental concentration. I therefore spent the day at my club and left him to his isolation until the following morning. What have you there, Holmes?
After you left, I sent down to Stamford's for the ordnance map of this portion of the moor. That is Baskerville Hall in the middle.
With the wood round it?
Exactly. I fancy this is the yew alley with the moor as you perceive upon the right of it. This small clump of buildings here is the hamlet of Grimpen, where our friend Dr. Mortimer has his headquarters. Within a radius of 5 miles there are, as you see, only a very few scattered dwellings. Here is Laughter Hall, which was mentioned in the narrative. There is a house indicated here, which may be the residence of Stapleton, if I remember right, was his name. Here are 2 moorland farmhouses, High Tor and Foul Mire. And then 14 miles away, the great convict prison of Princetown.
The setting is a worthy one, if the devil did desire to have a hand in the affairs of men.
The question is whether any crime has been committed at all, and if so, what is the crime, and how was it committed? Have you turned the case over in your mind?
Yes, I've thought a good deal of it.
There are certainly points of distinction about it. That change in the footprints, for example. What do you make of that?
Perhaps he wished to make no sound?
He was running, Watson. Running desperately for his life. Running until he burst his heart and fell dead upon his face.
Running from what?
There lies our problem. I am presuming that the cause of his fears came to him across the moor. Then there is the question of whom he was waiting for and why in the yew alley rather than in his own house.
You think he was waiting for someone?
The man was elderly and infirm. We could understand his taking an evening stroll, but why otherwise stand at the moor gate for 5 or 10 minutes as Dr. Mortimer deduced from the cigar ash?